Here's a look at one of the finished products with the shapes elevated off the back surface. Here's another, not yet colored in, but this one I left removable so you could see the spacers behind it. These spacers are four-sided. The ones we made actually are triangles. They only have three sides. But it's the same basic idea. That's a folded piece of poster board. And what we're going to be doing is collapsing them to make them skinnier, like the ones I'm pointing to, so that they can fit in a wider variety of spaces. Once you get your colors all finished, the first thing we're going to do is cut them out. And you may be more comfortable with scissors. You may be more comfortable with an X-Acto knife. What I'm doing is flipping it over and labeling on the back from top to bottom each of the individual snake forms, and I'm holding it up to the light so I can see. And in this case I had 7 different sections. So I labeled them first, starting at the top right corner. And so here I'm cutting out the first one with scissors. I have a little better luck with the X-Acto knife, but whatever you're more comfortable with and seems to work better for you. So here I'm going to give the X-Acto knife a try. You want to try to stay in the center of that seam as much as possible while you're doing this. Okay, once I have them all cut out, I'm going to go back and add a little black to the edge where I cut off most of it. And so I've just got a scrap piece of paper underneath, and I'm writing the thick point Sharpie right along the edge. And you need to be really careful with this. It's easy to get a stray mark and have it wander over onto your finished surface. So this just provides a nicer finished edge and helps even out the kind of black border that you're going to want around the individual shapes. Okay, now we're going to trace the different shape, each one individually, starting with the top one. You're going to lay it right on the edges of the flat portion of your foam board and hold it real still. Trace along that outer edge. And then you're going to write the number of the section that you just traced. In this case, that was number 1. Here's number 2. And number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in sequence. Really important to lay this out. If you don't have this as a reference point, the next step is really difficult. Now you need to decide what sections you want mounted directly to the background and which ones you want popping out and how far you want them popping out. I just kind of quickly and randomly chose to put this bottom one mounted directly to the background, so it obviously needs no spacer. I'm just going to use a glue stick, and I've got piece of scrap paper underneath so I don't get glue stick all over my cutting mat. You want nice even coverage all the way out to the edges of your shape. And then just make sure you get your piece oriented correctly. Make sure it matches the line that you drew as a guide on the foam board. Smooth it out nice and flat. It should stick immediately. And then I chose that one, I think that was number 2, as another one to mount directly to the background. Usually choosing ones all the way out to the outside edges, or maybe just one in from the edge, looks pretty good. It makes sense to have the ones in the center the most elevated. Now, people have done it a lot of different ways, and that's entirely up to you. Here I've got the smallest spacers that we made, and I'm laying them out on the section where they're going to go and just making sure I'm going to be able to fit them and spread them out. You want to try to get 3 different ones across the entire span to really support the shape. So now I'm going to take some glue and make a little puddle of glue, and I'm going to dip the edge of that spacer. Actually, I'm going to dip both the top and the bottom edge, so I'm going to flip those over. I did that kind of out of sequence here on the video, but you want to dip that bottom edge, and then I need to flip it over and have glue on the top edge too, and you will see that the glue mysteriously appears. You want it on the top and on the bottom, and then you're just going to lay it gently on top of those spacers. You're going to want to look down directly from the top to make sure these are lined up, that your edges go right out to the edge of your foam board, and that everything is lined up just the way you want it. So here I've selected the center one to be my tallest, so I'm going to use some of those 2-inch spacers. And same thing, a little puddle of white glue, and spread them out so I have good even support. Just kind of tap it on that glue puddle and then flip it over. If you get good coverage, it's going to stick. It's going to stick way better than you think it's going to stick if you allow it to dry, and it has a pretty good contact area. So now I keep sliding it out of your view in order for me to be able to look directly down on top of it. And even then, you can see kind of in my rush, I don't have them lined up exactly right. You can see there's a little gap between the 3rd and 4th one from the top. You want to be careful as you place them not to knock them over. Just once you set it on there, give it a gentle push to make sure that they are adhering to the glue. Here's an example of what you can do with the frame. These are both utilizing 1/4-inch strips and 1/2-inch strips to add some interest to the frame. If you get that far, you're going to get a 3-inch wide by 18-inch or 17-inch long strip of foam board, which you will want to cut into 4 half-inch strips and 4 1/4 of an inch strips. So you'll have a total of 8 strips to work with. 4 are 1/4 of an inch, and 4 will be a 1/2 an inch. Now the way that you end up utilizing those is going to be your own design decision. Again, this is not a mandatory part of the finished product, but for those of you that want to add a really nice extra little touch that makes the frame look a lot more significant and substantial, you can cut those strips just very carefully with the X-Acto knife. Here I'm just kind of laying them out to show you basically how I started to lay it out and think about what I was doing. I was laying them one on top of the other. I tried different configurations with some behind and some in front of the frame. And then you can kind of weave them as you build this little Jenga structure and get lots of different looks. To assemble these, you will just use tiny little drops of white glue at the corners. And if you want to cut the length, you can use your X-Acto knife. Some people like to leave the edges extended. Looks kind of like Japanese architecture in a way, like you might find at a pagoda. So there's an example of one that I made. That frame lays entirely on the front side of the existing frame, and this other one that was student made is kind of, askew. It's put on at an angle, and she didn't use all the parts, but again, it's a really interesting finished product. And all that can be assembled carefully using white glue.